Good morning, everyone who's joining us. I would like to congratulate you for the attendance that has been sustained from the very first session. And that shows a great interest by you. Today, we have a session number 3 with the two speakers about production and transmission of power energy and also transportation. We're going to talk about the different areas of transportation in terms of energy transition. So today we're going to have a very fruitful session. I would also like to greet everyone who is on YouTube Live on the stream. And I share now the screen. And those who are on the Zoom platform, please adjust your interpretation. Please, the interpretation mode, you can click on the globe at the bottom of the screen and choose the language of your preference. I also would like to recall our listeners and those on YouTube to take the channel of the Academy, whatever language you would like to choose. Now we have most of you joining us already. We have a wonderful audience today. And we are about to start. We have Javier. Just a couple more minutes to let other people join, and then we will start. You can see, okay, we have some messages on the chat from Uruguay, Caracas, Venezuela, from Ecuador, Perez from Paraguay. Please keep adding your name and your countries on the chat. Also, you can share your LinkedIn links profiles so that everyone gets to know you or get in touch with you. And we have you've done very well. So let's get started now that most of us are already in the session. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and now I'm going to introduce Javier first, Orquera, who's our first speaker. Javier, would you like to share your screen as I introduce you? Great. Welcome everyone to this session number 3 of the Academy of Energy Transition. I would like to tell you that this is class number 5 of the academic program of production and transmission of energy power, and this is a master's degree in the electrical engineering. He also did an internship in the hydrogen, and currently he has 4 years working for the International Energy Agency, especially in the electrical markets. And without further ado, Javier, the floor is yours. Let's start with your presentation. Welcome. Well, thank you, Paz, and the entire team who is behind this academia. I'm so happy to be here and on behalf of the agency. Now, I would like to start this class. The program, basically, today's class is about production and transmission of electricity, and I'm going to talk about several topics of the electrical sector. Of course, this sector is very complex, has many areas, but it's going to be very difficult to get in depth with the many topics, but I would like to give you a glance of all the topics that are extremely important to get to know, so that you can also be prepared in the discussions ahead. As a context, and just to provide some information, so in the report that I have worked with in the International Energy Agency, I started working as an internship in Latin America. But then I've been working in electricity matters. I've been working in the integration unit of renewables in the agency, and I also worked in the electrical grids, integration of renewables, specifically solar and wind energy, as well as the monitoring of the electrical market, and the STAR report of last year that was published by the Agency for Latin America. Yeah.
Perspectivas energéticas de Latinoamérica en el largo plazo. Vamos entonces con una referencia de que vamos a ver hoy día.
The perspective of the energy of the Americas. So let's get started with the reference of what we are going to discuss today. I'm going to start connecting as Diana mentioned, my colleague Diana showed about the importance before. The importance of the electrical sector for energy transition. Why is it important? And to make the efforts in this sector. I'm going to discuss very briefly methodologies of generation of electrical energy and also what we're doing in the agency. Then we're going to move on to the electrical grids, transmission, distribution, and related infrastructure. The fourth item would be specifically about the integration of renewable energies. The question of why we have to work on this topic and what characteristics of these sources require special attention. The fifth item connected with the fourth item is storage of electrical energy, how we can do that, and what are the trends that we expect in the years ahead. And finally, and if the time allows, I'm going to discuss a little bit about the regional electrical integration, which is about connecting and doing exchanges of electricity among the countries. And I'm going to, if I don't have the time, I will leave these presentations so that you can refer to it afterwards. Let's get started. Today, what we are seeing is that many services are essential, and these services, in many cases, depend specifically of the electrical supply. For instance, we have hospitals, communications to talk by the phone. They need to charge the cell phones, for instance, also because of the network and one phone to another. Also, the Google Drive system, for instance, all these uses electricity as well as the traffic lights on in the streets, pumping for water, combustible pumps, transportation. Sometimes it's electric, and heaters and air conditioning as well, and industrial processes. So you can see that electricity is something cross-cutting in society, and therefore we believe it's important, and important is going to grow and grow as we reduce the use of other fuels or energy like carbon or gas. Now, connecting with a slide that showed that by Diana, my colleague Diana from the agency, we can see the electrical sector plays a key role in global decarbonization. Why? Because although the electrical sector, you can see electricity is the sector that causes more emissions nowadays. However, if we see all of the necessary, we have all the necessary conditions to keep this journey according to the Paris Agreement, we see that they decarbonize the emissions much quicker to basically zero with the goal to 2050. So this is a great change in the electrical sector. So we are going to be like the spearhead of what is being going to be explained afterwards. Now also, by connecting the Diana's slide, the electrical sector is a key enabling a factor for the mitigation measures. For instance, electrical sector energy has an electrical component. Wind and photovoltaic energy also has this electrical component. We can see hydrogen, for instance, although it is not the only way, but it's one of the most important ways that we hope to reduce emissions. That would be is going to use electricity as well. Also, electrification that refers to modifying certain usages that we usually use energy-based, for instance, fossil fuels, and to switch to electricity and many other topics. Although the electrical sector is not the only enabling factor, it is a common factor in many aspects. That's why it is important to consider the electrical sector when discussing what are the ways and the road and the paths in the economy of the countries as a whole. Now let's move on to talk about what are the electrical energy sources. A historical, very brief history, just reference. The first trade plant of electrical generation was opened by Thomas Edison in 1882 in Manhattan. This was a plant that was based on carbon. The initial plant based on carbon energized the light poles for over 80 clients as they extended all the grids and cables to supply more people and have light. In 1900, 18 years later, there was 30 companies had electricity in Manhattan and many other parts of the world, which means that electricity started to grow very quickly with all the qualities that this can contribute. Since then, there's been many years that have gone by. The quantity and efficiency of the technological generation has grown. Now I'm going to discuss very briefly here some of the main technologies of electrical generation and how it works. First of all, we have thermoelectrical power plants. The thermal energy turns into heat and electricity. How does this work? Well, that we burn fuels. It could be oil, carbon, gas, natural gas, or within this category, it is considered the nuclear energy. When they separate the atoms, which are very tiny particles, and in the end, this creates heat. This heat heats water vapor, and this goes through certain pipelines, and this creates or generates a turbine. With this rotatory movement, what happens is that they create a conversion from the energy of movement and kinetic movement, but this is motion energy towards electricity, and this allows for these power plants to create electricity. Now, the second case, the solar, photovoltaic solar energy. This is a renewable energy like the hydro, electrical, and wind powers. This is based on the solar panels, as you can see on the image, turned the sunlight into electricity. Just to explain very briefly, this is the photovoltaic effect. That is when the sunlight goes to the panels, it opens all the material within it, and then it opens an electrical field, and these electrons create the electricity that can be used, for instance, to collect lighting, moving some energy, etc. Just to give you a couple of examples. Thirdly, we have hydroelectrical. Hydro means water. So this energy, the principle of this energy is that the movement of the water through some turbine and pipeline, this turns into electricity. In this case, currently, this is the largest renewable source of Latin America. This is a source that is quite present in what we call uh, uh, when we needed to create. This is reservoir. This is called the water reservoirs. These they block. They have some blocking of the water. There is a source that is not static, just sort of saying. But basically, this is connected to a river, and the rear comes some water. It moves the turbine. Then the water goes to the river to keep it going towards the natural flow rate. In Latin America, we have many sources of these ones: Brazil, Chile, Colombia, and many other places. And this is a source of large scale. This helps to maintain the emissions of the electrical sector as low as possible. Also, we have the wind energy. We have turbines that have height that are quite high, about 60 meters high, and the principle they use the energy of the wind moves all these rotor blades, and then this becomes electricity. And I said, these are just some representative. We have also the geothermal electricity. How does it work? These are the plants that are located close to, there are geothermal reservoirs where there is hot water and vapor underneath the underground. So what they do is when they dig, it can access to these reservoirs of hot water and vapor, and with this water and vapor, this is transported to the surface through a pipeline, and this pushes a turbine, propels turbine, and then this creates electricity. These are sources that also exist, and these plants are seizing those natural resources. Now, what are the trends? So we can see that the electrical sector progresses very quickly. It has a deep decarbonization. For instance, in 2022, of sources with low emissions, for instance, solar, we have wind, hydro, electrical, and other renewables, and nuclear that does not emit CO2. All these altogether creates 40% of the electricity in the 2022, and the rest, that is over 60%, are based on fossil fuels. This is today's image, but we see ahead in 2050, for instance, in the agency, we have three different scenarios or situations. In May, we see that in any case, the main energies, solar, wind, have a very important role than currently. So we can see that this is a great transformation and that is quite significant and is progressing significantly. That is going to make for the electrical sector to lower their emissions because of these renewable sources that are going to replace the generation of electricity that now are based on fossil fuels, which isn't great right now. In the entire transition, that is quite important, and as we can see on the slide, in these three scenarios, that we can determine according to the conditions and can supply between 30 to 80% of electricity to the energies with low emissions. Now let's discuss a little bit about the electrical grids. In this case, what we see is that these grids are basically the infrastructure that connects the generation of electricity for consumption. Basically, these electricity grids have the work or the responsibility to transport electricity from one place to another. On this image, it is a very simple graph of a traditional network or grid. There are some central grids, electricity grids, where we can see the transport of several kilometers. There is this infrastructure with towers, etc. And the electricity reaches to the place that is going to be used. For instance, an industrial plant to produce iron, chemicals, etc., or to produce paper, for instance, or also directly to residences, houses, departments where people live, or small businesses. So now I'm going to bring together all these elements of course, I can answer any questions at the end of the session. First of all, we have also the electricity grids or central power plants to create electricity. First, we have an electricity grid, or we have the wind energy, and they are connected to this grid, specifically in the transmission part, to take the electricity that they create all the places that are needed. In this case, although it is not exclusive, that the centrals should be connected to the transmission, typically when this is a large scale where you can have a lot of electricity in a unit of time, they're all interconnected in a central in a transmission grid that works at high voltages. When we talk about emissions, transmission in particular, typically we use materials like aluminum or copper to make the difference with distribution. That we are going to go into detail with this, that the transmission lines have to be very big. Those are the ones that we can see, for instance, if you roll on a train, automobile, or bus, you can see those lines because these cover long distances and uses a lot of electricity. Just to give you some examples, we have the towers, they have typically between 15 and 50 meters high. So they are quite visible from afar. And these are big projects that take many years to be built, in some cases up to 15 years of building, if you consider the entire phase of design, engineering, on how high the tower has to be, what's the power of electricity, and all those factors, and to go through certain sections of the land. These transmission lines take the electricity from the central grids, large central grids, to a substation. What is a substation? Basically, this is a place of some infrastructure where they receive the electricity, and this turns into another voltage, like a third voltage, like the force that pushes that electricity. The sources are the substations. They turn into a certain voltage at a more adequate force for smaller electricity grids. And these have other functions as well to keep for the system to be safe, stable. They also redirect the electricity from one place to another. And they have always schemes of protection. For instance, if there is a bad, like a rainfall or winter, or there's some failure in central, these substations have the capacity to mitigate the negative impacts of all those failing effects or unexpected events. So from the substation of transmission, we go on to the distribution grid or network. This is distribution, as its name says, we distribute the electricity where it is going to be used. What it does is that they lower the voltage and somehow the force of the electricity, and with this they connect and they provide electricity to the consumption of industrial plants. And they, for the machines that they use, where they need a voltage that is higher than residence, for instance. And they bring electricity to some houses, buildings, business premises of higher of low or medium consumption at medium scale. And also this is what composes the electricity grid. This is where it starts generating from the generation to the consumption. It is important that in the context of the electricity grid is that the picture of the electrical sector is changing deeply compared to the traditional scenario. In the traditional system, as many countries around the world and also in Latin America has a system where they have these great power plants like thermoelectrical, hydroelectrical power plants. So they have been quite centralized, and that is that there is a lot of different units that are working. In addition, these power plants, in many cases, had a characteristic that is called dispatchable, which is a thermal or hydroelectrical power plant. Assuming there's enough water or enough fuel, they can handle this at discretion when they created the electricity without plant. Unlike the wind or solar energy, where they depend directly on how much wind or how much sunlight is there. Also, these centers, this traditional system that they have, like they seem to be very steady. They are based a small quantity of generation power plants made the planet to be more central. Also, the energy should flow in just one way from the grid generations to the grid in these traditional systems. However, what we can see in the new paradigm that is coming up, we have the generation that in addition to the traditional generation, we are having these solar, photovoltaic, or wind energy that are quite variable and they are decentralized. There is a great quantity of small plants, for instance, on the house roofs or the roofs of certain buildings. That's a change of paradigm because in the end, we must have a very good, and we always have to ensure in the electrical sector that the demand and the generation will be the same. So we have to handle that variability of generation, and we also have to handle on how to do for you to connect those solar panels or those wind towers where there is no other plants in the cities themselves. At the same time, since we are having new stakeholders such as transportation, we have other aspects. There are many more stakeholders actors and the creation of competitive markets. We also have bi-directional flows because people can create individual channels at the home. They can also have their own decision. And we also have other smart grids that have the technology like heat waves or different for different the demand and also the generation of electricity. And we have to consider the infrastructure. So what we have seen in the analysis is the development of the grids that must be accelerated to keep in going with the transitions. And to apply with the commitments of now, it's 80 kilometers long of lines of distribution here until 2040. We need to replace or expand that grid at the same quantity. That is, at the same quantity that we have right now should be expanded or replaced in order to be in line with the growth of the demand and the connection of more renewables, as well as to increase the access to electricity to other places that there are none. We also have to increase in investment that we've seen in the report that we did last year. We have to double it around $300 million every year to be in line with the energy transition. That's why I want to stand out that the grids are very important for the transition, and it is important that invest and to create all the conditions, not only for renewable networks, but also to facilitate the access to the electricity, the heaters through electricity, and to also handle the demand that is growing year after year. Now, connecting to this, I'm going to move on to a very important item, and that I already discussed previously, the integration of renewable energy. Why it's necessary to discuss about this? As I mentioned before, in the electrical grid, there's always going to be a balance between the supply and demand. Why? Because if this is not a balance, we can have a cutoff or outages in small areas. But if it is a very bad situation, this can have outages in large areas. That's why it is important to make sure that you have a balance in the production, demand, and the consumption of electricity. In this case, you might wonder, perhaps you have seen some graphs and analysis, the photovoltaic and wind energy are so cheap when they are produced. Why not only just install many of them in order to lower the emissions of these systems? Well, there are four particular characteristics why it is not as simple as just invest a lot in solar or wind energy, and that's it. And one of the characteristics you can see on the graph at the bottom, the variability and the uncertainty. Solar irradiation and wind are variable and uncertain. They keep changing minute after minute, sometimes hour after hour, and they are also good models to predict how much is going to happen in the next day and next day. These models depend on nature, and these are subject to certain levels of error. So it's not possible to predict accurately, and then we needed to create the ways on how to handle that uncertainty and variability in order to guarantee that the electricity supply is safe and to be balanced, as I said, the generation and demand. As you can see on the graph at the bottom, I took the generation hour after hour of a full week in Spain in 2024. And you can see in each one of these days, you see a clear movement of solar and wind energy, but that profile according to the sunlight or the clouds every day depends. It changes. For instance, in January, it's lower. Then we have the 7th is higher, and it's quite variable. The same happens with the wind generation. The wind generation has more variability hour after hour, and it can also create certain changes that are quite notorious. So we can see 7, 9, 10 of January. This is a low, and it's part of normal operation because it depends on how the wind is going to work or that day. So we needed to handle that variability and incorporate these different electrical systems. Also, the geographic adjustments. Usually, in the case of Chile, in the desert of Atacama or Brazil, in the northeast Cerrado or Guajira in Colombia, many times the renewable resources where usually the best resources are away from the cities. Also, we have a third characteristic, which is decentralization. As I said, this type of plants will have a greater number of units, unlike the thermoelectrical, these has less quantity of them. On the last characteristic, I'm not going to emphasize much on that. That this is by using traditional technology, this type of control have now contributed a lot to the stability of the traditional sources. Discuss about the impact. There are not enough measures to handle these measures, but we need them to integrate much better the system. And we can see that many countries do not implement enough measures to handle these aspects. We can have up to 15% of risk by 2030, and because there will be less energy that we will be using by these sources, this energy is compensated by fossil fuels. These reductions of CO2 since 2022 to 2040 will go to 20% lower. Although if we do these measures, if we put them in place accurately, and this is very important not only to invest in funds, but also we have to make sure that the entire environment and infrastructure and all the regulations to use these systems are in place in order to seize these renewable sources. Now, about the storage of electrical energy, and before closing my presentation, I would like to connect it to the previous topic. One of the things to handle the variability is that when I have these renewable electricity in excess, I can store these somehow to use afterwards. This can be done minute after minute, hour after hour. We can think perhaps at a scale of a few weeks or a couple of months. Why? Because the sun is less strong during winter, so we have sunlight in during summer. I can store it and use it when I need more energy afterwards. So what do we see as storage technology? We have two. One is the battery systems, which are the ion lithium batteries. These are used for electric cars and also for the electricity grids. And also we have other usages. These use basically in the case of ion lithium, this is again a chemical component that this allows us to recharge the batteries to recharge towards the system. And we also have the pumping hydroelectric power. This has a terrible limit that if I wanted to save or store some electricity, I can use the electricity from the grid to move an engine that pumps up the water to a higher level. And if I need, then I can create electricity instead of consuming. So what I do here is to make this water to lower, to move the turbine so that the movement of the turbine on water can create some electricity. This is also a very interesting source that helps for longer times and higher quantities of energy than a set of standard batteries. An important issue to stand out is the numbers. Batteries play a very important role in the complying with this goal that was committed last year to triple renewables by 2030 to triple renewables. And they see that the global storage capacity based on the batteries must grow in 2030 and to be 6 times what it is right now. This has to do with the electrical batteries can be seized with variable renewable energy, photovoltaic and wind mostly, but this can also store other sources that are quite important for the electrical storage. Okay, I don't have much of the time, and we can probably discuss about the integration. Now I'm going to go to the conclusions of the class before the questions. To close, the electricity, as I said at the beginning, is taking a very important role, more and more relevant one of all the usages that we can see that can contribute. This can make the necessary efforts to make the supply very safe at a minimum cost that we are clear to make this energy transition to become effective. The second item, as I showed you with all the electricity grid, the variable sources, and the electrification of consumption, etc. You can see that the electrical systems are changing deeply in all aspects, and this requires attention. Also, renewable energies play a very important role nowadays in electricity. We have to keep it growing in the future and to enable that, and also to enable the economic growth and increase to electricity and to access electricity. And more important aspect is to invest in the electricity grids. More importantly, it's going to be clear that the countries implemented measures to integrate efficiently the characteristics of renewable energy that include investments in infrastructure and changes in storage, for instance, but also changes in the markets and the rules on how these electrical systems handle all this. And finally, and I'm going to leave the presentation for these, we have to integrate the electrical systems among others and to allow exchanges among countries to reduce the cost, to increase security and accelerate decarbonization. So this is my presentation, and thank you. I'm here for the questions. Okay, thank you so much with your presentation. It was very interesting. I know that many of us have wanted to hear more about these analyses and very strong points that indeed are in right now. Of course, I have some questions on the chat, but I still have a minute to read three of them. And then we will move on to the students who would like to open their mics and pose the questions live. Thank you, Javier. The first question says, this is from University of Brazil. So the question was in Portuguese, but I already have this in Spanish. Question here, question if there is technical viability and economic viability to incorporate the nuclear energy in the electrical matrix here in the region, and if the answer is affirmative, yes, are they going to use a large plants or there are new nuclear plants in nuclear plants? Yes, should I respond or after the feelings? No, first one. Please go ahead with the first one. But very concise, please, because I have the other two, then we move on to the people raising their hands. Okay, thank you for the question, Luis. Well, I'm an expert in nuclear energy. I have to be clear about that. But I'm going to try to give you one answer. Nuclear energy has been used in many places. In fact, there is in Latin America, if I'm not mistaken, Brazil, Argentina, they have nuclear plants. It's not like the region starts from scratch and they need to invest more. Of course, there are nuclear sources, but with this energy, one of the things that these projects measure is that they take a long time, more than 15 years typically, and this is over cost of what it is surpasses the cost of what has been initially forecasted. But that's why some countries are skeptical to invest in nuclear energy. And there are certain commitments and push from politicians, like the rebirth of nuclear energy. Some countries are considering this source. So without knowing specifically how is the acceptance in Latin America, I would say that at least at discussion level, there is a great interest that has been revitalized by nuclear energy, and we will see how is this going to become more materialized, and if there are going to be more initiatives and projects around this issue. Okay, thank you. Another question. She says, Javier, have you explained the electrical system, the national, the Chilean system? As in, I, well, I think that is the same for each country. However, I would like to ask, and this is a country that we all wonder, the division of the electrical market in these areas of generation, transmission, and inclusion is the same for all countries of the region? Well, my presentation was an overview of the principles of function. Indeed, the case of Chile, these are separated statements at the market level, generation, transmission, and distribution. But in a historical movement, the liberalization of the markets were typically when the electrical systems were created. There was a monetary, this was one company that managed all the aspects from generation, transmission, and distribution. But as Latin America started to move forward, they understood that it could be better, more, it was cheaper to separate these three in different markets. For instance, at least in Chile, you cannot have a simultaneous business of generation transmission because this can be a risk for competition and for prices. If I'm not mistaken, some countries in Central America, they still have an integrated system still. For instance, Costa Rica, I think that they are switching already, but I believe that they have an integrated system, and in many countries around the world, they still have integrated system. It's not that all countries around the world have this separation. I would say that is quite clear for the trend, that they are going to keep separated because of competition in the sector. Now I'm going to give you the last. I'm going to give you the last questions in on the chat. But now we're going to move on to Nicolas Rieta, who has a second race. Well, yes, my question about the solar panels. Knowing that in Spain, we have solar panels. Sabiendo también que because they come from mining, I knowing also that. Sorry, the audio is not very good. What could be used? How useful can be the solar panels? I'm sorry, I think it was Chile or general. It was about Chile. Yes, I would like to know about the solar energy with the panels. Well, I cannot be very exhaustive about the Chilean case because it is not my specific area of expertise. But in general, as I showed in our projections, solar photovoltaic energy globally and in many countries, this is actually the highest source of growth for renewables in 2030. Of course, depending on the local conditions, there are some countries that may need more transmission or more grids to have more solar power. There are many projects also that we are seeing that in many solar power plants that they are proposing to build together with batteries in order to handle the variabilities and to be able to make more flexible the generation, and not only when there is sun, but if you store some of that solar energy, they can use it at night. For instance, they could be more competitive at price level with the electricity producer. This is the solar power plants. So based on the numbers of the agenda, the photovoltaic solar power can have some local problems according to the conditions. In general, the trend is going to be um, going to increase in the electricity grids in Latin America and around the world.
Javier, por esa respuesta tan
Thank
específica.
you, Javier, for that specific answer. Okay, I hope this has been well answered. Now, Fernando Perez Cruz, please, if you can open your camera for your question.
Hola, gracias por la presentación.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation. I would like to know, Chile is, I think that is leading in terms of energy transition, but there are some problems with the transmission grids. And my question is that given the fact that there are certain infrastructure, those transmission changes are quicker or easier. And on the other hand, we use 220 voltages. But I'm not an expert on electricity, but perhaps we can use 180 volts so that we can reach an average in the region. Thank you. Yes, Fernanda, thanks for your question. Well, perhaps the quickest one is when the voltages are conventional very big. These are some countries 120, others 140, others 220. This is a convention engine, and this can take a long time to change, because if you change that convention, then you have to make sure that everything that is connected to the grid, all the appliances from home, the refrigerator, or any other aspects must be capable to handle, must be able to handle the voltages. I think that just, unless a country finds a very specific requirement to do that, maybe the convention could change, but it depends on the governments to come to agreements in order to harmonize these voltages. And the question about the transmission, well, we don't have an analysis of Chile that I could say, okay, or that I can base on to make this comment. But if this is a very challenge to the need of transmission or distribution, I know that there is a discussion in Chile of having more transmission. I know that this project that is making progress. So this can help to mitigate all those problems. In general, just to make a comment of the presentation, we show that the world has to invest more in grids. And not only on renewables, in the case of Chile, would be connected to Atacama plants, but also because of the demand and the economic growth and other factors. So people now are having more electricity than they used to have. That's why we need more investment in grids. In my understanding, that will apply to the particular case of Chile and other parts of the region. So just to complement, here in Chile, last year, they enacted a law for the storage of batteries, so that this gives us some time to make these changes. Well, these are complementary issues, as I mentioned. The networks are necessary, but as I discussed, there are some elements that are there rather than just investing in this infrastructure. We have a report about integration where we discuss that there is not only placing batteries in the grids, but for markets to work defined and that the system can be optimized in order to have more solar and wind power. And the idea is to decrease the cost as well. That's why it's important to do this. Thank you. So thank you so much, Javier, for answering our questions. And now we're going to the last question to go to the next class. And we're going to have a transportation. So having the last question of Alejandro. Hello.
Mi pregunta va más hacia, bueno, mencionaste que, bueno, sí, en efecto, las
You
energías
mentioned that
renovables como eólica y la
just
solar
like the wind
sí
and
tienen
solar
mucha
power
variación porque dependen de
have
efectos climáticos,
a
¿no?
lot of variability
Y por
because
ende
of
necesitamos baterías,
the
pero
climate
estas baterías
effects. And also
usualmente
we have
ion de
batteries, but
litio,
these batteries,
como lo platicaba, es un
especially
gran
the
impacto
lithium
ambiental,
one,
¿no? Por la minería y la
because of
extracción de
mining, it
recursos,
has
¿no?
some
Que la
environmental
minería,
impact.
queramos o no, sigue
Mining,
dependiendo de energías fósiles,
we
¿sabes?
hope that we are
Entonces,
not going to
¿cuál
depend on fossil
sería, o
fuels.
sea, en
What
tu
would be,
perspectiva?
from
Y
your
dirijo más,
point
más
of
que nada mi
view,
pregunta a las energías de potencia que se
and
ocupan en
especially
fábricas y
this
aparte de la
power
generación masiva
energy is
como
used
el carbón,
in
uso de gas
factories
natural,
and where they use
¿cuál sería la
carbon and
energía
natural gas.
renovable
What would be
o limpia
the
o de
or
bajo impacto
renewable
de carbón
energy
que más
or
podría
low carbon impact
hacer el papel de
energy
reemplazar a una
that
energía
can
de potencia
replace much
pues
better
de generación de potencia como que muy contaminante como
power
la que es el
energy
carbón?
that could be less contaminant than carbon in the industry, in the factories. Well, thank you for the question, Alejandro. I think that there is no just a one size fits all answer, one size fits all. But perhaps it depends on the demands, the dispatchable demands. Some can have a hydroelectrical source or geothermal source. For instance, this probably this type of sources can be handled in order to solve this. In regard to batteries, in fact, I think that the agency is watching very closely the recycling issue, because we know that when this is produced and extracted, lithium can create an environmental events that you can probably review our last report that was published yesterday. There is not only how many batteries do we need, but there are analyses about the implications. For instance, how can this impact of the supply chain? How much of recycling capacity do we need in order to keep going on with these agreements? We only know that in order to have a sustainable, to make it sustainable, we needed to consider the environmental impact, and we are doing the follow-up to all the numbers that we are using in the agency. Thank you very much. There are several questions on the chat about batteries and the last regarding your last answer. So we would like to invite you to read the last report of the agency so that you can see your answers there. Sorry for time constraints. Thank you, Javier, for attending this session and for taking your time and your work to provide this presentation. So on behalf of everyone, thank you very much. And now we're going to have a quick break. We are going to wait for and we are going to move on to the next session. Thank you very much.
Gracias.
Gracias, Javier.
Súper. Oye, estemos ya ahora conectados acá, mantengámonos en la sesión. No nos vamos a ir a break porque queremos darle la introducción ahora a quien se llama. Él va a ser nuestro orador para este segundo bloque de la academia. Su clase es la clase 6 y nos va a hablar de teorías de
The transportation is here we have Mr. Felipe, who has joined us and just to provide a brief introduction. He is a mechanical engineer and master in design and technology of advanced vehicle systems. On the other hand, he is a PhD in engineering, has research and projects and energy projects. He is working from the unity of sustainable development.
Y se especializa en emisiones vehiculares de
Specialist in
eléctrica y
the emissions of vehicles and energy efficiency, which are the topics that called us to this session. And please, Felipe, please go ahead with your presentation.
Hola, buenos días para todas y todos. Primero
Thank you.
quisiera
Good morning,
confirmar que me
everyone.
escuchan.
First of all, I would like to confirm that you're listening. Yes,
Correcto, mil gracias, Paz,
Thank you
por
very
la,
much.
por la introducción.
Thank you, Paz, for the
Quisiera
brief
en este
introduction.
momento compartir mi pantalla
Today I would like to show my
para iniciar con la presentación.
screen.
Perfecto. Me dice si tienes... Ahí sí.
Ahí pueden ver mi pantalla ya.
Puedo ver tu escritorio. Ahora veo la presentación. Hay una pequeña lámina
Sí,
adelante.
son
there is a pop-up window.
confirmémosle que sí. Perfecto. Bueno, nuevamente, muy buenos días para todas y todos. Gracias por
Thank you, and good
invitarme
morning,
a
everyone,
ser
and thanks for
parte
the
de la
invitation
Academia de
to be
Transición
part
Energética
of the
para
Academy of
América
Energy
Latina y el
Transition
Caribe.
for Latin American
Mi
Community.
nombre es Luis Felipe Quirama,
My
como
name
bien
is
decía
Felipe
Paz,
Gibama.
soy
I'm
oficial de
responsible
programas de la
for
Unidad de Movilidad
Energy
Sostenible del
official
Programa de las
programs
Naciones Unidas para el Medio Ambiente.
for
Y
the
el día de hoy quisiera enfocar la
Nations
presentación
Environmental
en
Program. Today I would like to
varios
focus on our
elementos a
presentation
tener en cuenta a la
several
hora
elements to
de
take into
desarrollar
account
proyectos de
when
movilidad
developing
sostenible,
the
pero
sustainable
también
mobility
dar
projects.
un
Also,
abrebocas
I
a
would like
cuál es la
to give you
situación y
an
los proyectos que se
eye-opener
están
about the
desarrollando
situation in
actualmente
projects that are
en Latinoamérica, algunos por
ongoing
parte
in Latin
del Programa
America,
de las Naciones Unidas para el
and
Medio
what
Ambiente, o
by
PENUM, también conocido
the
como UNEP en inglés, y otros que están desarrollando
UNEP in
otras organizaciones. Entonces,
and other organizations.
sin más preámbulo,
Without
quisiera
further ado,
entonces decir
I
que
would like them
de esta
to
unidad para la que yo
that
trabajo está
that
localizada
I'm
en Nairobi,
working
Kenia, y
in
desde allí implementamos
Kenya.
los programas de movilidad sostenible para toda la región y nos ubicamos en la estructura del PENUMA dentro de la División de Industria y Economía. Esta es una foto del headquarters en Nairobi, Kenia, pero mi base es Panamá por si eventualmente quieren localizarme geográficamente. Estos son
But
los
if you
temas
want
que
to
vamos a
open
tratar
line,
el
we're
día de
gonna
hoy. Entonces
we
vamos a
are
hablar
going to talk
un
about
poco sobre el
these
contexto
topics,
en
and we're
temas
going
del
to talk a little
transporte,
bit about the content
temas
and
de
the
emisiones
implementation.
vehiculares, y eso lo conectamos después con
And
su
then we
impacto
can
sobre la
these
calidad del aire, el cambio
on the
climático
air
y
quality,
las
climate change,
NDCs.
and
Posteriormente, eso lo conectamos con
these
temas
connect
de estándares y programas de
topics
emisiones
such as
vehiculares, calidad de
standards and the
combustibles y eficiencia
quality
energética.
of fuels
Posteriormente, movilidad
and
eléctrica, un
energy
elemento que
efficiency and electrical
es clave
mobility.
para la región es
An
el
element
tema de
that
la
is
importación de
key for the
vehículos
region
usados.
is the
Y
import,
finalmente,
the
voy a
import of
comentarles un poco
used
sobre
vehicles.
algo nuevo que estamos
Now I want to talk to
desarrollando
you
dentro
a
del
little bit
PENUMA,
about
que es
something that we're developing that we can
el concepto de digitalización del transporte dentro de los
about the
proyectos
digitization of
de movilidad
transportation
sostenible.
the sustainable
Entonces,
projects.
voy a empezar con esta imagen, y esta
Now
imagen
I'm
la
going to
tomé hace
show you
un
this
par de
image which
años
was taken
en la
about
avenida principal que
a
conecta
couple of years ago in
headquarters de
where
Puma en
that
Nairobi,
connect the headquarters of
y
the
es una hora
in
pico
Nairobi.
básicamente,
This
pero
is peak
digamos que la
hours,
quise
as you
traer
can
acá
see.
porque
But
creo que
basically, I
para
wanted to
ninguno de
bring
nosotros
this
este
to
tema
move
es
to the
ajeno.
level
Esta
that is
situación
very
es común
important
en
to this
diferentes
because
países de
very
América
common
Latina
situation
y el
in
Caribe,
many
en
countries of
Asia
Latin America
y
and
también en África, y lo resumo en los
and
siguientes
Africa.
elementos. En esta
And
imagen
I
podemos ver
recently using the
elementos como
different
la
components. Here we can see
monotransportación,
like a
es decir, el
monotransportation,
uso
which means the
por parte o el uso de vehículos con tasas de
use
ocupación
of
inferiores a su
vehicles
capacidad máxima, en
with
donde en vehículos
rates of
livianos podemos
occupation that
hablar de
are
8.5
inferior to
pasajeros, o
the
en
maximum
autobuses de
capacity.
12
We can see
pasajeros, y también
have
vemos
5 people in
que
cars
predominan
and
los vehículos
30 people in
a combustión,
buses.
y
So we can
dependiendo
see that are the vehicles,
de
private vehicles
la
that are
política del
prevail.
país,
You can see also
vehículos
the
con bajos
combustion,
estándares
the
emisiones y
vehicles of the
eficiencia
lowest
energética,
standards of
muchos
emissions
de
and
ellos,
the energy efficiency.
como ya lo
Many of
decía,
them,
operando con
as
combustibles
Ivo
fósiles,
said, they
y
operate with fossil
muy poca
fuels.
presencia de
And
vehículos
a very little
eléctricos, pero
presence of
también podemos
electrical
ver que
cars. But we can
elementos
also
como la
see
movilidad activa y no
elements such as
motorizada
active and not
todavía no son
uh,
usados
transportation are not
de
used
manera
yet
masiva, y en algunos casos
in
no
a
son
massive way.
priorizados
In this
en
case, they are
temas
not
de
prioritized in the use
infraestructura. Y
of
también varios vehículos
infrastructure.
que,
And
digamos,
several
por las
vehicles,
condiciones que se encuentran,
because
ya
of
son
the
objeto
conditions,
ya pueden ser objeto de
they are
desintegración física vehicular. Estos son
very
elementos que son transversales sin
physical
importar la región en la
dangerous.
que se vea, y que nos
Vehicles
encontramos también en América Latina y el
this
Caribe.
is how
Y estos elementos afectan de tres maneras
These elements impact on
el
food waste.
planeta a través de tres crisis
The
planetarias. La
planet
primera,
through
creo que
planetary
para
crisis.
nosotros
The
es más
first one
evidente,
that I
es
think
todo lo
that
que
is
tiene que ver con cambio
probably
climático,
this has to
pero
deal
también
with the
el hecho
climate
de operar
change.
de
Also,
operar grandes flotas de vehículos en zonas urbanas, digamos, genera problemas de contaminación
and
ambiental
we
y por
have
ende salud pública. Y también el hecho
we
de
have some
querer
environmental problems as well as
de la
public health
expansión de las
issues,
ciudades y
and
de
also the
querer llevar
expansion of the
servicios de
cities
transporte
and
del cargo de
those
pasajeros
providing the transportation service of
a todos los
passengers
sitios y a las
to the
expansiones de las
different
ciudades, pues crean
locations,
también
like
la
the
pérdida
expansion of the cities also
de
create a loss
biodiversidad. Entonces,
of
aquí también quiero
biodiversity.
mostrar que estos son
Here I
elementos
also
que son
wanted to
comunes
show that
y
these
son
are
fotos
common
tomadas en Santiago de
elements and
Chile, como pueden
pictures
ver, pero también en
taken in
Bogotá,
Santiago de Chile
también
and
algunas de ellas
Bogota,
en
and some of
Cuba,
them
y
in
vemos que esto es un
Cuba.
elemento que
Let's say
se va
that
expandiendo en
this
toda la
is an
región
element that keeps
independientemente
expanding across the
de los
region,
niveles de ingreso que se
regardless
tengan.
of the levels of income.
Y si lo cuantificamos un poco, vemos que
When
el
we
sector transporte,
quantify
esto
this, we really
digamos
see
que
that the
no es nuevo para
transportation
ustedes,
sector
seguramente
is not new
es uno
for
de los
you,
mayores
perhaps,
productores
but it's one of
de
the
gases de
greatest
efecto invernadero,
producers
siendo
of
responsable
greenhouse
de
effect
casi un
gases,
cuarto de las
being
emisiones
um,
de CO2, pero también de emisiones
emissions.
Contaminantes como
We
los
also
NOx, el
have
material
contaminant emissions
particulado.
like
Y eso tiene un
NOx and
impacto
particulate matter.
dentro de
This
la
has
salud
an
pública.
impact that we see in
Y
public
si
health.
analizamos un poco mejor
We
los temas de
analyze
emisiones,
much better
vemos que las
the
emisiones las
emissions
podemos
of the
clasificar
matter.
en
We can see
emisiones
emissions
que
from
se producen
emissions that
desde
are produced
que se genera el recurso energético, que
from
se
this
denominan
is the
emisiones
energy resource is
well
created.
to tank, y
Then
cuando se usa el
within the
recurso
1 to 10,
energético, es
when
decir,
we
cuando
use
se
the
usa
energy
el
source,
combustible o
when
el
we
recurso
use
energético
the
en
fuel
los
or the
vehículos
energy
y las
resource
denominamos
in the
emisiones
cars and
tank to
vehicles,
wheel. Y
and we see
en
the
procesos de
different
combustión, las
emissions. So
emisiones
we,
más comunes que
in the
vemos
process of combustion, the
son
most common emissions that we see are
emisiones de
emissions
CO2, emisiones
of
de
CO2,
hidrocarburos no
emissions
quemados,
of
emisiones de NOx,
non-burned
emisiones
hydrocarbons and NOx, emissions
de monóxido de carbono, y cada uno de ellos
carbon
tiene elementos
monoxide,
o efectos
monoxide
distintos
emissions that
sobre
they
la
all have
salud
different
de las
effects
personas.
upon
Entonces,
the
en el
health
caso,
of
por
people.
ejemplo, de las emisiones
So in
de
the case
hidrocarburos no
of the
quemados,
emissions of
son primero
non-burned
que todo precursores
hydrocarbons, first of all, these
de
are
ozono, y
the
también todos los
emissions,
elementos asociados con los
non-elements
hidrocarburos
that are related
livianos,
to
como los
hydrocarbons
bencenos, los
or like
formaldehídos,
the
los
hydrocarbons.
acetaldehídos, generan también un problema de salud
Also,
pública. Y eso
there are
también
some
pasa
emissions that are created
con el resto de
public
las
health
emisiones.
issues. This also happens with the rest of the emissions.
Y existen protocolos para
There are protocols
controlar
to
esas
control
emisiones. Entonces, los
those
vehículos
emissions. So
que van a salir o van a ingresar
vehicles that
a
are
diferentes
going to
mercados automotrices
enter to
son
different
objeto de diferentes series de
automotive
pruebas que se hacen
markets.
tanto en
They go
condiciones
under
reales de
several
operación como en
testing and
condiciones
both
de
in real
laboratorio,
conditions
simulando
of condition as well as laboratory testing,
condiciones de operación que
simulating in
generalmente se
different
hacen a
conditions of
través de
operation that
ciclos de
are done
conducción
through
que
cycles of
buscan reflejar
driving
condiciones de
that
operación,
seeks to
digamos,
reflect the
particulares a unas
operation
regiones, y por
conditions
eso
that
se
are
desarrollan
particular
diferentes
to the
ciclos de
region. That's why
conducción,
we develop
pero también
different
vemos
cycles
que
of
eso no es
driving.
capaz
But we can
de
see that
reflejar
this
todas las
is
emisiones, sino que
not
existe
capable
también una
of reflecting
diferencia
all emissions,
entre
but
lo
there
que
is a difference
se
between
reporta en el vehículo y lo
what
que
is reported in the
ocurre en
vehicle and
condiciones
what
reales de operación,
occurs
y
in
esa diferencia puede
conditions
llegar hasta
of
entre un 30 y un
operation. And this can
60%.
reach up to
Y
31 or up to
también digamos que
60%.
alternativamente existen formas
Also,
de monitorear
alternatively,
la
we have
operación de los
ways to
vehículos y las
monitor the
emisiones
operation of the
utilizando
vehicles and the
diferentes
emissions by
sistemas.
using
En
different
los últimos
systems.
años, las pruebas
In the later
utilizando
years,
PEMS o Portable
the
Emission
testing
Monitoring
by
System,
using
pues
PEMS
han
or
adquirido,
portal
digamos,
monitoring
bastante
system,
relevancia
emission monitoring system, are
para
quite
reflejar
relevant
las
in order
condiciones
to
reales de
reflect
operación y
the real
para medir las
conditions of
emisiones derivadas de
operation
las
in order to measure
condiciones
the
reales de
emission
operación, pero también
coming
medir,
from
por ejemplo,
the real conditions, but also to measure
monitorear el vehículo utilizando la
or
información que se
monitoring the
produce
vehicle by
a través
using
de
the
la
information
computadora o
produced through
haciendo
the
seguimiento,
computer
por ejemplo,
or by
del
doing a
consumo de
follow-up, for
combustible
instance,
directamente
of
con la
the
cantidad de combustible que se
consumption
agrega
of fuel with
al
the
vehículo.
quantity of
Y
fuel
todo
that's
esto, digamos,
added
que
to
nos
the
lleva
vehicle.
a
So
generar
all
datos
this
que nos
creates
permiten
data
hacer
that may
diferentes
allow us to
evaluaciones de impacto
make
energético y
different
ambiental
impact
en diferentes
assessment,
niveles.
both in
Entonces,
energy and
dependiendo del
environment at
nivel que yo
different
quiera
levels. So depending on
seleccionar,
the level
pues
that I want to choose,
utilizo un nivel
I can
micro o
use
utilizo un nivel
a
macro.
micro or
Y
macro
solamente para
level.
poner dos ejemplos,
Just
un par
to
de
give you
ejemplos,
a couple of
cuando
examples,
hablamos del nivel micro,
when
nos
we talk
referimos,
about the
por
micro
ejemplo, a
level, we
tratar
also
de
refer
modelar el
to
consumo de
try to
combustible o el
model
consumo de
the
energía de un vehículo
consumption
o de
of
una flota de
fuel
vehículos,
and
mientras
energy
que el macro
in
lo
a
que
fleet of
buscamos es
vehicles whereas in the macro scenario,
de cómo es el
try to
consumo de
have the
energía
trends
o
on
las
how is
emisiones
the
de
energy
una ciudad
consumption
o
or
de
the
un país.
emissions
Y cada uno,
of
digamos
a
que
country or city.
tiene
So each one of
su
them
nivel
has its
de
own
exactitud,
level
pero también
of
sus
accuracy,
requerimientos
but also
de
its own
información.
requirements of information.
Muchas de las emisiones que se generan
Many of the nations
por los
produced
vehículos
by
básicamente
the
surgen
vehicles,
o se
basically.
pueden mitigar desde la etapa de diseño. Entonces, si pensamos también en poder tener diseños que incluyan de entrada el uso de tecnologías eficientes, de tecnologías de control de emisión más estrictas, podríamos empezar a reducir las emisiones incluso desde el producto, no necesariamente desde la operación. Y tal vez eso se puede entender un poco mejor con esta gráfica. Estos son elementos o diferentes estrategias que podemos utilizar para reducir el consumo de energía tanto en
The
el
consumption of
producto
energy both in the product
como en
as
la
well
operación.
as
Entonces, por ejemplo,
in the
todo el
operation.
tema de
For
tecnología
instance,
de
everything
motorización, en
around
donde caben los
technology of
vehículos eléctricos, híbridos,
motor-based
caben también
technology
vehículos con
with
mejores niveles de
hybrid
eficiencia de combustible, son
vehicles
elementos que
much
podemos
better
tomar
efficiency
o
engine
acciones que podemos tomar
vehicles
desde
or
el
actions that
producto,
we can take
mientras que
from the
acciones, por
product,
ejemplo, como el
whereas the
eco-driving
actions
o la
about eco
ecoconducción, la
driving
logística
or
inteligente
eco drive,
o la gestión
eco
eficiente de la flota son elementos que
efficient
podemos
logistics,
o acciones que
these are
podemos
elements or
implementar
actions that
en
we
la
can
operación,
implement
es decir,
in
cuando el
the
vehículo
operation.
ya
So when the
está
vehicle
operando
is
dentro de la
already
flota. Entonces,
operating
esto para
within the
mostrarles que
fleet.
las emisiones
So
no
this is just
solamente
to
se
show
derivan
that the emissions
o
are
son
not
producto de lo
only
que de la
rather
operación
the
y son
result of
producto
our
de lo
operation,
que sale
but
en
this is
el
a
tubo de
result
escape, sino que
of
también viene en una
that
cadena de
does
atrás
not
y
come
viene una
only
cadena,
from the
como
south pipe,
empezamos
but
esta
it comes
presentación,
from a
desde el
chain
recurso energético que utilizo.
from
Si mi
the energy
recurso
resource that
energético
I'm
viene
using.
de
If my
fuentes
energy
renovables, como
resource
ya lo
comes
pudieron
from
ver
renewable
tal vez en la presentación anterior,
sources, as it was
mi
provided
impacto en
with this
términos
presentation,
ambientales y
the
energéticos va
impact
a
in
ser
terms
menor
of environment
si
and energy is going to be lower.
el
But
vehículo o el
if
modo de transporte que
the
utilizo
vehicle or the
consume menos energía, por ende
form of
produce menos
transportation that
emisiones, también
consumes
voy a
less
reducir en
energy
total
with
las
less
emisiones, pero
emissions.
también es cómo lo utilizo.
We can produce
Si lo
emissions, but
utilizo
it's
de manera
also how I
eficiente,
use it. If I
voy a reducir
use these
emisiones y para eso
efficiently,
también
then
están
we
las
reduce
diferentes
emissions.
estrategias aquí planteadas. Y aquí quisiera traer algunas cifras
Here, I would
relacionadas
like
con
to bring some numbers
el
related
impacto del
to
sector
the
automotor en
impact
términos
of
de contaminación del aire y salud pública. Y vemos que esta cifra no ha variado mucho en los
see that
últimos
this
años, sigue
number
manteniéndose
has
más o
rather
menos el
varied
mismo
in the
valor,
latest year.
pero
This
alrededor de
has
4
sustained the
millones de
same
muertes
value, but
en
around
el mundo
4.2
ocurren
millions
por la
of deaths
contaminación del
around the
aire
world
y
occur
en
because of the
Latinoamérica
contamination
todo
of
esto
air,
está
because of air
alrededor de
pollution.
250.000
In Latin
muertes
America, it is
prematuras por
around
contaminación del aire
250,000
exterior.
premature
Y
deaths
obviamente el
because of
transporte es uno de esos grandes
outdoor
contribuyentes a esta
air
situación,
pollution. And
a
also,
esta
transportation
indeseable
contributes
situación,
to
dado
these
que, como les mostré en
undesirable
las
situation.
diapositivas anteriores,
As
pues
I showed
produce
in one of the previous
NOx
slides,
o NOx,
these produce
produce
NO
hidrocarburos no
eggs or
quemados,
NOx.
produce
These
material
are also
particulado,
produce non-burnt
produce
hydrocarbons,
monóxido de carbono. Entonces todo eso digamos que deriva en
particulate,
contaminación del aire y por ende
particulate also.
en
And
problemas de salud
that's why
pública.
this ends
Lo otro
up
que también
in
tenemos
public
que ver
health
es que
issues.
la
Another
contaminación del
issue
aire
is that the
por
air pollution
fuentes móviles y el cambio
due
climático
to
no son dos
vehicles
elementos
and
que
climate
están
change
aislados, son
are
dos
two
elementos
elements that
que
are not isolated. These elements
podemos enfrentar con las
can
mismas
be
estrategias.
faced
Entonces,
with the same
no vale la
strategies.
pena separar,
So it
digamos,
is not
las
worth to
acciones en
separate
aquellas que
the
están
actions
orientadas a
into
mitigar
those
el
that
cambio
are
climático y aquellas que están
intended to mitigate
orientadas
the climate
a
change
reducir
and
las
those that are
emisiones
intended to
contaminantes. No,
reduce
lo que
the
tenemos que hacer es
contaminant
trabajarlas
emissions. What we have to
de
do is to
manera
work them
conjunta para que podamos ser más
jointly
efectivos en la
so that we
reducción
can become
o en
more
el
effective
impacto sobre los
in
sistemas
the
de
reduction
contaminación
or
del
the
aire
impact
y de los
upon
sistemas de
the
cambio
systems
climático.
of air pollution and climate change
Y,
systems.
perdón, un segundo. Y hablando de cambio climático,
Now,
también quise
talking
traer
about
algunas
climate
cifras
change, I
asociadas
would like to bring some figures
al
related
impacto
to
sobre
the
o a
impact
la generación de emisiones de CO2 que
or the
produce
generation of
el sector
CO2
transporte.
produced by the
Tal vez
transportation
esta
sector.
cifra ya la había dado en una
Perhaps
diapositiva anterior,
these
pero el
was
transporte
given
es
by a
responsable
previous
y ha venido creciendo mucho más su
slide.
participación
Transport
de
is
cerca de un
very
cuarto de las
responsible.
emisiones de
It
CO2
has
que se
about
producen
1/4
en
of
el
the
mundo. Esto
CO2
puede
emissions
variar
produced around
también
the
de
world.
país en
This
país.
can vary from
En
country to
algunos
country, of
países el
course.
transporte
In
puede
some
ser
countries,
25 o puede ser
transport can be
40,
25 or
dependiendo, digamos, de
40%,
también los otros
depending
procesos
on
productivos o
the
procesos
all the
económicos
productive
que
processes or
se den
economic
en
processes
estos países. Pero
given
digamos que a
in
nivel global y en
these
promedio,
countries. but
responsable
globally, as an average, it is
un cuarto de las
responsible
emisiones, pero también
for
vemos
one
que
fourth of
en la
the emissions
gráfica
globally. We can
de la
also see in the
izquierda vemos
graph
que
of the
las
left
proyecciones en términos de
the
crecimiento
projections in terms of growth
del parque automotor
of the
son
automotive
altas. Más o menos
park
para el
or
2050
vehicles
se
are quite
espera
high.
que
By 2050, it's
en el
expected
mundo se triplique la cantidad de vehículos y esos vehículos
that all
van
the
a estar
vehicles
principalmente en países que se consideran de bajos y medianos
are
ingresos,
going
es
to
decir,
be mainly
básicamente la
in
mayoría de
countries,
América Latina,
low-income
África y
countries.
algunos
That is basically most
países
Latin
de
America,
Asia.
Africa,
Entonces,
and some countries in
en este
Asia.
caso tenemos que también
In
ver
this case,
cómo
we
podemos
also
reducir el impacto tratando
must
de
see how
reducir
we can
esa
reduce
cantidad
the
de
impact by
vehículos que van a
reducing
ingresar
that
en los
number of vehicles that are
siguientes
going
años.
to
Y
enter
también vemos en la gráfica
the
de la
forthcoming
derecha, en
years.
la
We can
inferior,
see
que
on
para
the
poder
graph
tener
and
las
lower
expectativas
right
en
hand
términos
that in order to in terms of
respecto a las metas del
expectations
calentamiento global
around
por
the
debajo
goals of
de
global
los
warming
1.5
and
grados, pues el
below the
transporte tiene un
1.5
rol
degrees.
importantísimo
Transportation
de
has
cerca
plays a
de
very
un
important
20%
role
de esas emisiones
about
que
the
debemos
20% of those
reducir.
emissions that we need
Como
to
respuesta
reduce.
a esto,
As a
desde la unidad de
response to
movilidad
this,
sostenible en PENUMA,
from the
tenemos cinco
sustainable
programas
mobility
o seis
unit in
programas
the
y el
network,
sexto
the
es
nation's
un
environmental
programa que
program
es
has
transversal y todos
and
ellos
sixth
están
one,
enfocados
we have five programs, the
a
sixth one that
enfrentar algunas
is
de
an additional
los
one, and
elementos
these
o
are
de los
intended
impactos
to
que genera
face
el
the elements
transporte
of the impacts
dentro
created or
de
produced by transportation within
el sector energético, pero también dentro
the energy
del
sector, but
sector ambiental.
also
Entonces
within the
tenemos
environmental
iniciativas que están
sector.
enfocadas
We have several initiatives that are
en
focused
mejorar la calidad
on
de los combustibles y los
improving the
estándares de
quality
emisiones,
of fuels
iniciativas que
and the
están
emissions
enfocadas en mejorar
standard
el rendimiento de
initiatives
los
focused
combustibles
on
o la eficiencia
the
energética, es decir,
yield
que
or
los vehículos
energy
consuman una
efficiency
menor
that the
cantidad de
vehicle,
energía
that
por
means the
kilómetro
vehicles use
recorrido,
less
iniciativas
quantity
de
per
movilidad eléctrica,
kilometer that
iniciativas
has been
orientadas a
driven,
reducir el contenido de
and
azufre y el
also
carbono
the
negro,
content
lo que se
of
denominan
sulfur and
contaminantes de vida
black
corta
carbon,
en
which
el sector
are
transporte, pero
short
también
life
aquellas que
contaminants in
están
transportation,
enfocadas
but
en promover
also
la
those that
movilidad
are
activa y la
focused on
movilidad no
promoting
motorizada.
the
Y un último
active and
programa que
non-motorized
estamos lanzando,
mobility,
que es un
and the
programa de
program that
digitalización del
we are
transporte, en
launching
donde
is the
básicamente a través de la
digitization
digitalización
of
y de la
transportation. Basically,
recolección y
through
analítica de datos, tenemos
digitization,
la posibilidad de
we
potenciar
can
los
have the
efectos
possibility
de estos
to
otros programas que están
strengthen
a
the
este lado.
defense of the other products that we have on the left.
Y aquí quiero mostrarles que
Here I would like to
cualquier
show
acción que
you
vayamos a
that
tomar en
any action
términos
that
de
we are
movilidad
going to
sostenible,
take in terms of
de algún
sustainable
modo
mobility somehow
tiene que estar atada a esos
must be
compromisos
tied to all
internacionales
the
que tienen los
international
países en
commitments
términos de
that all
reducción de
countries
emisiones. Entonces, lo primero
have in
que
terms of
quiero
the
mostrar
reduction
acá
of
es que
emissions.
solamente
What I want
20
to show
países
you
en
here is basically
Latinoamérica
that 20 countries in
han
Latin
establecido
America have
dentro
established
de sus NDCs
within their
metas
NDCs
u objetivos relacionados con
goals
reducción de emisiones dentro del
related
sector
to
transporte.
emission reduction within
Eso
the
es un número
transport
bajo,
sector.
digamos,
Those
si lo vemos
numbers,
respecto al
you
impacto
can
que genera el sector
see in
transporte
regard to
dentro del
the
cambio
impact
climático.
we
Entonces,
have by the
el
transportation
primer llamado
system.
es a que dentro de la próxima negociación de las NDCs, el próximo ciclo de negociación que se va a dar en los próximos años, se pueden
In the
incluir más
forthcoming
medidas
years,
orientadas a
we
la
can include
reducción de las emisiones por
measures
parte del sector
intended to
transporte.
reduction
Este es un
emissions by
estudio
the
que
transport
lanzó
sector. This is a
recientemente
study
el
that was
PNUD,
launched recently by the
otro programa hermano del
this is
Sistema de Naciones
another
Unidas.
rather
Los invito
program
a que lo
of
consulten para que
that is
aprendan un poco más
systems. I would like
sobre este
to
tema.
go in depth by looking
Y
into
en este sentido, digamos
the
que si
system.
vemos
In this
esas
regard,
acciones, cómo están
if we see
orientadas,
all
vemos
these
que
actions, how
muchas
things
de
are
ellas o la
oriented,
mayoría de
we
ellas
will
están
see that
orientadas
many of
a
them, or most of
reducir
them,
emisiones,
are
adoptando
intended to reduce
acciones dentro
emissions
del
by
transporte
adopting
público,
actions within the
también
public
dentro de los
transportation
vehículos
sector, as
livianos o
well as
vehículos
in
privados de
the
pasajeros.
lightweight
10 de ellas en
vehicles,
temas de carga, 9 de ellas
10 of
en
them
temas de
in terms of
movilidad
freight,
activa no
others in
motorizada y
active
6 de
mobility
ellas
or
enfocadas en
non-motorized
combustibles
uh,
y energía. Y
mobility, and
también
others
quise
are focused
traerles
on fuels
a
and
esta
energy.
presentación,
I wanted
esta
also to
gráfica
bring
del lado
to the
derecho, en
presentation
donde
the graph
podemos
on the
ver
right, and we can
cómo
see
las emisiones cambian
how
de
the
acuerdo
emissions change
a la
according to
orientación de
the
cada uno de los países.
orientation
Entonces
of each
vemos un
one of the
elemento
countries.
común entre
So we can
Colombia y
see a
Chile, que son los
commonality between
vehículos
Colombia and
livianos,
Chile,
en
where they
términos
have lightweight
digamos, de
cars or
contribuyentes a las
vehicles
emisiones de gases de efecto
that
invernadero
contributed
y
to
también el
the
transporte de carga. Pero en
emissions of
Colombia
greenhouse
pasa algo muy
effect, but also
particular
the
y
car
es la
transportation.
presencia
And here we have something
de las
particular. This is
emisiones
the
que
presence of
provienen de
the
los
emissions that
vehículos
come
de dos o tres ruedas, es decir,
the
principalmente motocicletas. También es
basically
importante decir que dentro de esas acciones que se están tomando para
motorbikes.
reducir emisiones,
The
más
motorcycles
o menos la mitad van
within the
enfocadas en la
measures, at
adopción de
least half of
vehículos
them
de
are
bajas y cero
focused on
emisiones. Entonces,
the
principalmente ahí estamos
vehicles
hablando de
of low
temas
emissions. Here we're talking
de
about
electromovilidad, y el resto se distribuyen en acciones
electromobility, and the rest
con
distributing
enfoque
actions,
institucional, 12%
focusing
en
on the
acciones orientadas a la
institutions,
eficiencia energética,
and
10
actions
orientadas a la
related to
infraestructura,
energy efficiency,
6 enfocadas en
infrastructure,
mitigar
6 focus on
perdón,
to
asociadas a la
mitigate,
renovación de flotas, y
sorry,
así sucesivamente se van, digamos,
to renewables.
fragmentando
And
las acciones,
we can
pero
keep
aquí lo
breaking
importante
down
es
the
de
different
mencionar que
actions. But the important here
la
is
mitad
to
de estas
mention
acciones
that
incluyen temas
half of these
de
actions include
electromovilidad.
issues of
Entonces empecemos
electromobility.
hablando de calidad de
So let's
combustibles y
get started
estándares de
by talking about
emisiones.
the quality of
Eh,
fuels and emission
antes de
standards.
entrar, digamos, en detalles sobre las
Before
próximas
going in
diapositivas,
depth
quisiera
about
mencionar
in
algo,
the
y es que
next
no
slides, I would
existe
like to
una
mention
acción
something.
única
There is no
para reducir
unique or single
emisiones, sino
action
que son
to
acciones
reduce
combinadas
the
que
emissions.
de algún
These are
modo tienen
combined
que
actions.
coordinarse para que
They
podamos
must
tener
be
una reducción
coordinated among each
efectiva
other in
de
order to
emisiones.
have
Y
a
una de
greater
ellas
reduction of
es trabajar sobre
emissions.
la calidad de
One of them
combustibles y
is
sobre
about the
los
quality
estándares de
of the
emisiones
fuels and standards of
vehiculares. De
emissions.
hecho, yo diría que
In
es la
fact,
primera que se
I
debe
would say that
adoptar,
this is
porque
the first one that
es
must be
la forma en
adopted
la que equilibramos
because
la
this is
mesa
the way in
tecnológica
which we bring down the
de
technological
tecnologías
uh,
vehiculares. No es justo, digamos, desde un
or
punto de vista
logical
tecnológico que pongamos a competir
from the
un
logical
vehículo o
standpoint that
un
we
autobús
start to be
eléctrico que tiene
vehicle
cero emisiones
or
en el tubo
electric
de escape
browser that have a
con
zero
un
emissions
autobús que tiene un
based
estándar
upon
Euro
doing
3
that
o
about
Euro
the
4. Entonces, de
are
algún modo, lo que
zero
tratamos es
zero
que cualquier
three
acción que
four
tengamos
the of
eh,
standard session. So whatever action
en
we
términos
take
de
in
tecnología
terms
vehicular,
of
pues esté orientada
vehicle
siempre a tener
technology,
aquellos
this must be
con mejores estándares de
related to
emisiones, y
you and
también
have the
aquellos con
best
mejores estándares en
standard
términos,
of
por ejemplo,
emissions
de vehículos de bajas y
in
cero
terms
emisiones. Y esa es la
of
forma en la que podemos
vehicles
eventualmente
with
reducir de
low
manera
emissions.
efectiva
So this
las
is the way
emisiones
we can
vehiculares.
reduce very
Entonces,
effectively
acá,
the vehicle
entrando
emissions.
ya dentro de la
So
diapositiva, vemos que los
in
países
this
en América
slide,
Latina y
you
el
can see
Caribe
that
han hecho
Latin
esfuerzos
American
en la
countries
reducción del
increasing
contenido de
their
azufre
efforts in the
en sus
reduction of the
gasolinas. El
content of
azufre en
sulfur in
particular
their
es el
gasolines.
contaminante, perdón, no
Sulfur
el componente de los
is
combustibles que es
component
responsable de la
of the
producción
fuel that
principalmente de material particulado. Entonces
is
vemos
because
que
of the
una
particulate
reducción en
matter.
contenido de azufre se ha venido
So the
presentando
reduction
en
in
varios de los
sulfur
países. Chile en
it
particular
has
tiene un
been
contenido de
done in
azufre
several countries. Chile
en las
has a
gasolinas de
sulfur
entre
content
1 y
in the
15 partes
gasolines
por millón,
between
pero
1
miremos aquellos
and
en
15
los que
parts
tenemos que
per million.
enfocarnos más. Por
But we
ejemplo,
can
Centroamérica, en
maybe we have to
Centroamérica,
focus more
si bien
in
existe
other
un
parts like
reglamento
Central
técnico de
America.
calidad de
Central
combustibles,
America, there is technical regulation of the
ese
quality of
reglamento técnico dice que
combustibles.
se
That
pueden aceptar
technical
contenidos de
regulation
azufre
states that
en
we
las
can
gasolinas de
accept
hasta
the contents of
500
sulfur in
partes por
gasoline
millón.
up to
Sin embargo, hay países en donde todavía
500
eso
parts per
puede
million.
estar por encima
But there are
de esos
countries that
niveles.
can be above
Y
of those
cuando hablamos
levels.
de tecnología de control de
So
emisiones
we
en
talk
los
about
vehículos,
the
básicamente
control
hablamos
technology in vehicles. So
como
basically, we are saying
hablamos
that
de una balanza entre la
there
calidad de los
is a
combustibles y
balance
la
between the
tecnología de
quality of
control de emisiones. No
fuels
podemos tener
and the technology
efectivamente
of
reducción
emission
de
control.
emisiones
We
si no
cannot
tenemos un buen
have the reduction
combustible
of
o si no
emissions
tenemos una
effectively. We
tecnología
don't have a
vehicular
good
que
fuel
lo
or
permita.
combustible, or
Entonces, de
we don't
algún
have a
modo,
vehicle technology that allows it to.
todos
That
los
allows it.
esfuerzos en
So
reducción
all the
contenido de
efforts
azufre tienen que
in
estar
the
conectados
content of
con
software
esfuerzos
must be
en también
connected to
mejorar la
efforts
tecnología de
and
control
to
de emisiones,
improve the
y eso
technology of
se
emission
representa
control
básicamente
and
en lo que se
the
denominan estándares
these
de emisiones
means the emission standards.
perdón, ¿alguien quiere decir algo?
Sorry, someone would like to say something.
No, Luis Felipe, adelante. Teníamos un
No,
micrófono
no, go
abierto.
ahead. We have
Ok,
just one
perfecto.
mic
Sí,
that is
listo,
open. I'm
continúo
sorry.
entonces. Entonces, hay un
Okay,
trade-off ahí entre
yes,
la calidad de los combustibles
there
y la
is
tecnología vehicular. Entonces, los
between
esfuerzos se deben dar
the
en ambos sentidos.
combustibles
Si yo
and
tengo un
also
combustible entre 10 y 15
technology.
partes por millón,
If
no
I
puedo
have a
ponerme a
cluster
operar con una
between 1
tecnología
and
vehicular
15
que sea, por ejemplo,
I
Euro 3,
cannot
porque no
work
estoy
with
sacando
vehicle
lo mejor de esa
technology
tecnología.
because I'm not bringing the best
Entonces,
of the
la idea es
technology.
que podamos tener
But
combustibles
if
con bajo
the idea
contenido
is
de
to
azufre,
have
pero también
a field with
tecnologías
low
de
content of
control de
sulfur, but
emisiones
also technologies of control
con altos
emissions with
estándares. Y en este
high
caso vemos que
standards.
muchos
In this
países
case, we
ya
can
han
see that many
adoptado
countries
tecnologías
have
por
already
encima
adopted
de
technologies
Euro 4,
above the Euro
pero
4,
también hay
but
esfuerzos, digamos, o
also there are
compromisos
some
para que
efforts and
esto se dé en los
commitments
próximos años. Entonces,
so
por
that
ejemplo, Colombia,
these
Perú,
happen in the
Chile
forthcoming years. For
han
instance,
adoptado
Colombia, Peru,
tecnologías
and Chile have
incluso de
adopted
hasta Euro 6. Y si nos
technologies
centramos en
of
aquellos en
up to
donde todavía
Euro
tenemos que
6. If
trabajar
we
más,
focus
pues
on those
vemos
that
que
we
por
have to
acá
work
tenemos
more,
muy bien, tenemos que
perhaps we
trabajar más en el
have
Caribe,
to
tenemos que
work
trabajar más
especially in
en
the
Centroamérica
Caribbean and Central
y
America,
también en el
and
caso
also
de Paraguay.
in the case of Paraguay.
Esto, digamos que también corresponde o es
This also
análogo cuando hablamos
corresponds
de
when we
combustibles o
talk
del
about
combustible diésel, que es principalmente para vehículos
diesel
pesados,
especially for
los
heavyweight
países se han esforzado más en
vehicles, that
tener
the
combustibles
countries
de
have
bajo
in the
contenido de
airports and
azufre
having also with
para
low
el diésel,
content
y
of
de manera
sulfur for
correspondiente vemos
diesel,
que hay
and
los
in
esfuerzos
a
en términos
corresponding way we can
de la
see
tecnología de
the
control de
effort in
emisiones
terms of
para
technology of
vehículos pesados,
controlling
pues
emissions
es
for
mucho, se ha
heavyweight
mejorado
vehicles have
de
been
manera
improved
más rápida que en la diapositiva anterior, que
quicker
era la de los
than in
vehículos
the
livianos.
previous slide,
¿Por
or
qué?
we had the
Porque los
lightweight
vehículos diésel
vehicles online, because of the
que
diesel
son
based
principalmente los que
vehicles
operan para
that
transporte de pesados o de
that
carga
is used for
pesado, pasajeros,
heavyweight or
sistemas de transporte, pues
transportation
producen
or
más
other
material
means
particulado, entonces por
transportation
ende
system,
se
and it
enfocaron
produce
más
more
los esfuerzos en este
particulated
segmento,
matter. Therefore, the
pero
efforts in
vale
this
la pena que
segment,
decir que no podemos descuidar
but it is
tampoco este
worth it to
segmento.
mention that we should not disregard
Pasándome la
this
otra
segment.
acción en la que podemos trabajar
Now, moving on
y
to
que es
the
una acción
another
inmediata,
action that we
es la
can work
eficiencia
on, which is
energética
immediate action,
vehicular.
is
Miren que
vehicle energy
esto
efficiency.
básicamente depende
We can see
mucho
that
del
basically
trabajo
this
que podemos
depends a
realizar a
lot
nivel de
on the
ministerios
work
de
that we
ambiente,
can
ministerios de energía,
do at
en la
the
adopción de
Ministry of
estándares
Environment
más
and
altos
Ministry of
de eficiencia
Energy
energética cuando se tienen
level,
y cuando no se tienen,
with the
en
standards
la
of
adopción
energy efficiency when we
de
have
algún
and we don't
estándar.
have it
Entonces
in the
vemos
adoption to
acá,
the standard.
básicamente esta gráfica me
So
gusta mucho
basically here we can see
porque
this
básicamente
graph, and I
presentados
like
tres
it
cosas. La
because
primera
we
es
can present
cómo,
here three things.
cómo
The first one
sería en
is
la gráfica
how,
de la izquierda,
on the graph on
esta
the
línea roja
left,
nos indica cómo es
this red
cómo
line
sería el
shows
crecimiento
us
de las emisiones
what would be
en
the growth of
un escenario de
emissions
business as usual, en un
in
escenario base, en donde no se
business
haga
as
ningún, o se
usual
continúe
or
con las
basic
intervenciones
scenario,
como se han
where we
venido generando,
continue
y la gráfica
with the emissions
perdón,
that
la
would
línea
be
azul nos
being
presenta cuál
generated.
sería la
And the blue
reducción de
line shows us
emisiones
what would be the
si
reduction of
implementáramos
emissions
una
if we
estrategias de
implement
eficiencia energética, es
the
decir,
strategy
algún
of energy
estándar de
efficiency
eficiencia
or some
energética,
kind of a
políticas,
standard
por
of
ejemplo, de
energy
etiquetado
efficiency,
vehicular, de
policies of
incentivos e impuestos a
vehicle
vehículos más o
labeling,
menos
incentives,
contaminantes.
taxes to
eh, y la
contaminant
gráfica
vehicles.
perdón,
And
y la
also
curva verde o la línea
the
verde nos
green
presenta acciones
line, the
combinadas, es
green
decir,
curve,
eficiencia energética
shows us the
más
combined actions that
electromovilidad.
are
Y
energy
aquí,
efficiency
digamos
plus
que lo bonito de
electromobility.
esta gráfica es que nos dice
Here,
que
the good thing about this graph
no
is
existe una
that
acción
it
única,
tells
es
us that
decir,
there is
tenemos que
no one
trabajar en ambos
single
frentes, en la
action. We
eficiencia
need to
energética
work in
y en
both
la electromovilidad
lines,
si
in
queremos
energy
reducir
efficiency and
las
electromobility. We
emisiones
want to
frente a
reduce
las metas que
the
tenemos
emissions
establecidas
against
a
the
nivel
goals
global.
that have been
Pero
established
también, no sé
globally.
si se fijaron, que aquí existe
Also, I don't know if you
este
saw that there
último
is
pedazo
this
en donde
last
queda
piece
todavía un gap,
here
y este
where
gap
we
es el que
see a
podemos
gap.
reducir con
This
otras
gap is the one
acciones,
that we can
como
reduce
por
with
ejemplo la
other
movilidad
targeted
activa y
actions.
no
For
motorizada, o
instance,
el cambio hacia el
with
transporte público
non-motorized
en vez de
or the
utilizar
change of public
vehículo
transportation
particular. La otra
instead of
gráfica lo que nos
private
muestra es
vehicles.
cuál es
Shows us
los
what is the
diferentes segmentos de
contribution of the
transporte
different
en el
segments
cumplimiento
of
de las metas de
transportation in the
reducción de emisiones,
compliance with
y
the
vemos
goals
que
of reduction of emissions.
quienes están,
Here,
digamos, llamados a liderar
those that are called
esta
to lead
reducción por la
these
contribución que
reduction
representan, pues
for
son
the
los vehículos de
contribution that they
pasajeros
represent
y
because
los
of
vehículos de
our
carga.
passenger
Y eso se
vehicles
conecta con
and
lo que
cargo
vimos
vehicles, and
también
this
en las
connected to
diapositivas
what
donde
we see
comparamos a
in
Chile
the
y a
slide
Colombia.
where we
Vimos que en
compare
ambos
Chile and
países los
Colombia.
vehículos de
We saw that in
pasajeros y de
both
carga
countries that
son
the
quienes
passenger and cargo
principalmente
transportation
generan
are the ones that
generan
produce
mayores contribuciones de gases de efecto invernadero.
greater contributions of
Desde el programa de las
greenhouse
Naciones Unidas para el Medio
emissions.
Ambiente lanzamos hace
Now,
algunos años
also
una
in
iniciativa que se
the
denominó
UNEVA,
Global
we
Fuel
launched an
Economy Initiative,
initiative
y
called
en esta iniciativa lo que hicimos fue
Economic Initiative.
entregarle a los países asistencia técnica para
You
conocer
provide
cuál
to
era
the countries
la línea
these
base de consumo de
technical
combustible de sus flotas,
goals to
y a
understand
partir
that
de eso
baseline of their
proponer
fleets
alguna
and
acción
asking
de
that to
eficiencia
propose
energética que
certain
se pueda
actions of
adaptar de
energy
acuerdo a las
efficiency
condiciones
that can be
locales
adopted
de
according to
cada
local
país.
conditions
Entonces, lo
of
que
each
hicimos fue
country.
construir
So what we did
líneas bases
is to
que lo
build
que
these basic
lo que representan
baselines
es como el consumo de
that
energía de la flota en un periodo.
represented the energy
Yo lo
consumption of the
llamo
fleet in a certain period of time.
una
I
foto
call it
energética de la
somehow
flota
like an
que nos
energy
permite
picture
mirar
of the fleet that
cómo es el
allows us
consumo
to
de energía de la
see
flota en este
how
periodo,
is the
y
energy
que si
consumption of the
implementamos
fleet
alguna acción
during a
de
certain period
eficiencia
of time,
energética,
and
por
we
ejemplo, como
implement some
lo decía
action
hace
of
un
energy
momento, un
efficiency, for
estándar
instance,
o
as I said,
un
like
esquema
a
etiquetado,
standard
esto
or
debería
a
tender
labeling a scheme.
a la reducción.
These
Entonces nos permite
can
comparar el antes
tend,
y el
these
después
can
de una medida de eficiencia
they
energética.
can lead
Y aquí vale la
to
pena,
the
digamos,
reduction
mencionar
of
que
emissions. And
Chile es
here
uno de
is
los
where to mention also that Chile is one of the leading countries in the energy efficiency matters. It has a law of energy efficiency that covers also the transportation sector and it has implementations for energy efficiency for lightweight labeling vehicles. But they are also working on the heavyweight transportation. These are also the energy efficiency policies that we were able to pull out from the different data of the countries. These are measures focused on information and training, such as the labeling or creating a website where people can enter to see how much they are consuming with fuel in their vehicles. There is another fueleconomy.gov that you can see the data sheet of the vehicle, and you can see the consumption of vehicles, also the taxes for fossil fuel, raising fossil fuels, or higher energy consumption, or certain incentives like that consume less energy, and that can be based on the energy efficiency or
CO2 básicamente. Y otras medidas, digamos, de enfoque regulatorio que son.
So we have a regulatory approach where we have the standard. There is a certain limit of what we can have and what is the consumption of it. Or a fleet of vehicles, depending on the project that we are going to provide to the standard. That limit should not be surpassed by those trading individuals in the country. Here I would like to give you a summary of what are the labels globally and how they have been developed in the latest years. This was a work developed by the ICCT back in 2016. This complemented the labels that came out recently. Here we have the vehicle labeling of energy efficiency of some of the countries in Latin America. And so we have Chile, Argentina, Uruguay. Some proposals are developed right now for Peru. Also, we have here.
Pasando a la otra medida que es movilidad eléctrica.
The other item, electrical mobility, we can see that, as I said before, 53% of the actions that have been put on in the NDCs, which are the commitments that are assigned by the countries in terms of reduction, corresponded to the measure adoption with zero or low emissions. And 19% of them have to deal with the electrification of the fleet. The countries have moved forward a lot in terms of regulatory matters and the development of strategies of electric mobility. In the implementation of the strategies, there are still gaps or opportunities to improve. There is also an important increase in the number of electric buses. In 2020, there were 1,000, and 2023, 4,000. We always say that this has happened in Chile, Colombia, and Mexico. And I would like to add something else. I think that this also has happened in Santiago, Bogotá, and the city of Mexico, because of this increase of the electric buses in these countries. And because these are the main cities, but there are other secondary cities that are trying to do this. And the idea is to do this in different regions, secondary cities. And I think we're going to see more electromobility in the forthcoming years. There are several stories in these great urban areas where we have formalized transportation companies, and we have to move these two regions and secondary cities. You can see here the distribution of these electric buses. Currently, I recommend so that you go to this page, which is e-bus radar. This is done by the ICCT, and they update permanently the number of electric buses in Latin America per country, city, and manufacturer. Here it is stated that most of the buses are 12 meters, but we also have an important participation of the buses are between 8 and 12 meters, and electro buses. Here I also take from the live report of ALADE, and I would recommend for you to consult. Basically, it tells us that since 2022 up to 2024, the number of vehicles with some type of electrification that can be vehicles that are battery-based electric vehicles have increased And in 2024, we have 250,000 vehicles, of which 50% are highly electric vehicles, and the other 50% are battery-based electric vehicles. This has been shown in Brazil, Mexico, Costa Rica, and Chile. Brazil is the one leading this ranking at regional level with over 152,000 vehicles. But there is a very particular case, which is Costa Rica. Costa Rica has around 17,000 units with electrification, and these electrified vehicles that it becomes the first country per 10,000 inhabitants. And now in Mexico, similarly for these countries, with a global program. And I remember that the person from Costa Rica, they are including the phenomenon where the name of charges that are being installed are not enough to comply with the expectations of number of vehicles that are coming in. So those who are buying the electric cars have to wait a long time to use this charger, or sometimes they don't find the available chargers.
¿Qué otros avances en movilidad eléctrica hemos tenido?
Other advances in electrical mobility, we must stand out the Mi Taxi Eléctrico in Chile. This is a program that in the first occasion launched 50,000 electric vehicles in the metropolitan area of Santiago. And in the second round, they have tried to migrate to other regions. Also, we've seen that the use of electric cars
o con categoría L, que son light electric vehicles.
Light electric vehicles category have been used coming for urban logistics services of the last mile, like Bogota, Santiago, and Medellin cities. This is another important advance that we have had. However, we have a big challenge here in Latin America between 50 and 60 million motorcycles that have been reported in summer of 2023. The one that I know about, what is in Bogota, out of 17 million, 20 million are motorcycles. So we need the transition towards electromobility in the motorcycle segment. And lastly, in terms of infrastructure of load, and I would like to talk about interoperability, to have common standards of connectors and protocols of communication, hardware and software issues, so that this allow any vehicle to operate in any loading station. So with this, I would like to show you a little bit of some of the projects that are worth to analyze. We talk about Mi Taxi Eléctrico program, and recently there were 60 electric buses to Barbados. I think that this is the first island in the Caribbean that has this number of electric buses. Another example is in urban mobility for trucks, e-trucks in Colombia by companies like DHL, Ecopetrol, Grupo Éxito. This company that is called Forte in Costa Rica, the Forte company have launched the first factory of recyclable batteries in Latin America. It is worth to analyze these type of things. In Cuba, there is a migration that is quite organic in terms of electric mobility, especially in the case of motorcycles. And the number of motorcycles have increased considerably in the latest years. When we have the specific numbers, they are very difficult to point, but sometimes they talk about 50,000 or 20,000 electric motorcycles. Also, just the example of Uruguay, the energy company of UTE, UTE that has developed an interoperability policy that is necessary to launch electromobility in these countries. Now I'm going to show you a little bit about the global program of electromobility of the UNEP. I'm not going to go in depth, but I'm going to leave the information. We have 50 national projects that we support that receive resources from environmental facility, and we provide capacity building and raise awareness raising of the development of national policies and regulatory frameworks, roadmaps and strategies, the creation of models, business models, and the creation of pilot projects regional platforms for the case of Latin America and the Caribbean. This platform we complemented with the Sustainable Mobility Center in Chile. Perhaps from some other places you may have heard about this. And what we do from the regional platform of investment and support is we provide technical assistance and training to the different cities of countries. Here we are in Mexico, the 9 countries that are part of the program, and some training, creation of spaces of practicing community practice. We have space days. We also have a window, a single window where you can place a question about this, and we try to answer or look for the person who can answer. And also the established marketplace sessions for the country, and the participation of these platforms for any particular country that may want to do so. These are the regional actions that we have so far according to the donor, and what we do in terms of support, technical support to the countries in terms of regulatory framework, project that is the design of our project and the training to fire department and other finance initiatives, and the long-term sustainability, which is fundamental. What is going to happen with the matters afterwards, what is going to happen with the cargo sector, and what's going to be the impact in part of employment or the impact upon employment and mobility. 2 tools that I would like to leave you here. This is the MOVE website. This information repository developed with the group climate Green Climate Fund resources, and this is the electrical mobility and the e-mobility tools. You can inquire in both of them, in any of them, so you can check the content and the tools that they contain that can be useful to you, especially the e-mobility tools is classified for users. So if you belong to the government, there's some material for you. If you belong to the private sector, there's other material for private sector, so you can check it.
No sé cómo cerrar esta ventana. Ahí ya. Y también estamos trabajando temas de
género. Also working the e-mobility. We believe that e-mobility as since we have to make changes in these systems, it's also an opportunity to reduce the gender-based gaps in the transportation sector. Here, I would like to provide you some numbers of a study that we did in Colombia and Ecuador, where we see the transportation sector, we see there is around 9% of women engaging in this sector. There is a gap in terms of wages. But there are also positive studies. I would like to invite you to review the study La Rolita. There are 287 female drivers that operate in the process. We have experiences that we would like to replicate in other countries. In the case of Ecuador, it's not very different. We only have, it's even worse. We have 7.5% of the female participation in the transport sector. The wage gap is 18%, but there are all projects that are trying to balance this in Ecuador of training specifically all women interested in this, and we're doing this with the public transportation to create courses specific for women, internship and exchange programs for female drivers that we are supporting from the UNEP.
Aquí hay un punto importante.
Here we have an important point. This is the used vehicle or second-hand vehicles around the world. Between 2015 and 2023 or 2022, there were 23 million used cars were traded. Those were cars that were used in Europe or in the Republic of South Korea, Japan, and the United States, and also in China. They are sent to Latin America, they're sent to African nations. So this is an element that we must take into account because we are not against having this type of trading, but we request that within a strict regulatory framework to make these vehicles not to contaminate, are going to be safe, and that somehow are going to contribute to road system to reduce the emissions of climate change.
En el caso particular de Latinoamérica,
here we're also working in Latin America, particularly. This number is of 2 million vehicles, and at least 33% of the vehicles go to Central America, 33% to the Caribbean, and 33% to Paraguay. And lastly, I would like to say that what are we doing in digitization of transportation? To us, the digitization basically is the implementation of technologies that allow to collect data of any nature related to mobility that allows us to improve the processes. And when we talk about improving processes, we talk about the emission reduction, contaminant, and of greenhouse effect. We have also the possibility of digitization transportation, not only the operators of the transport system, but the data that are produced and can reach the suppliers or manufacturers of vehicles to assembly plants and decision makers in the public sector and the citizens who are the end users. In terms of digitization, we have the possibility to do temporary and space tracking. We can visualize these on the cell phone to see the location at what time. These can be accessible remotely. But also, we still need for this information to enter segments of the value chain. I mentioned a few before, but we can use in order to reduce emissions. That's what we still need to work on. Here I'm going to leave you a comment that shows how digitization can reduce emissions. But what we seek is for data to take us to create useful information to take actions that focus on changing the services of transportation, to improve the level of occupation, to use better technologies.
Y este es el proyecto en el que estamos trabajando ahorita.
This is the project that we are working on that I mentioned before, which is access. This accelerating access to low carbon mobility solutions through digitalization. That's the access number. So digitization should facilitate implementation of one of these three actions that we are trying to change, avoid, shift, improve.
Y que podamos monitorear la situación antes de implementar
before implementing that ASI strategy, and then measure those things in terms of we are working in 6 countries: Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Mexico. And in the cities of these countries, we are going to have a pilot project of a transport digitalization. We will focus on reduction of emissions, and we're going to escalate to a subnational plans and policies and a regulatory frameworks at national level. And all the learnings of this country, we are going to bring these to the support centers for digitalization. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for inviting me to this space where I was able to share a little bit what we do from the United Nations Environmental Program and sustainable mobility. And I am here at your disposal for any questions. Yes, thank you so much for the presentation. I can understand the effort and the work that you are making from your area. In fact, all these things in regard to transportation, it was very interesting. Thank you for delivering so much, and the presentation is going to be available to all our students in the folder of the academy. Now we are going to move on to the Q&A. We are a little bit over time. Please, if you can stay 5 more minutes, because we have a few questions on the chat. We are going to take the 3 questions by Carolina, and Maria Hernandez. And for instance, question is there any international regulation for the disposal of these batteries, to make a load of these batteries? How are you going to mitigate the effects of the infrastructure in electromobility? And lastly, we have the question how we can tackle the comments by the audience in regard to these ways, so that the new users of these technologies can see the benefits of adopting these options.
Okay, yo creo que puedo empezar por la última.
I think that I can start from the last one.
también muchos de los elementos que hemos evidenciado
Many of the elements that we
temas de movilidad
have
sostenible, históricamente
evidence in terms of
electromovilidad es que todavía existe
in
una
electromobility
gran
and
cantidad
sustainable
de
mobility is
desinformación.
that there's a great
Entonces, lo que tenemos que hacer
amount of
nosotros,
information that is
creo que no
or
solamente
a
desde
great
PENUMA,
amount of
pero desde
misinformation.
cualquier rol que
It's not
tengamos
only for the
quienes
UNEP, but
participamos
any role
en términos
of
de la
those who are
transición
engaged
energética
in
es
terms of
poder generar
energy
más información
transition can provide more
que esté,
information.
digamos,
And
más enfocado en los diferentes grupos
that
de
is more
usuarios
focused on the
a los
different
que pueda llegar.
user
Entonces,
groups that they
quienes,
can
por
reach.
ejemplo, comercializan
So
vehículos,
those, for instance, that
deberían
trade
tener más
vehicles, I
información
believe that
acerca
they should
de
provide more
cuáles son las ventajas,
information
pero también
about
cuáles
which
son las
are the
limitaciones de
advantages, but
cada una de
also
las
what are the
tecnologías.
limitations
Eso
of
es lo
each one
primero.
of the
Creo que
technology.
hay dos
That
puntos
and
muy
on the
importantes.
first
Nosotros dentro de nuestros proyectos siempre tenemos un componente de
in the first
capacitación
place, we need also
buscamos
to
que
provide
sirva
some
para tomadores de decisiones
training that
para
will
ciudadanía.
be useful for
La
decision
segunda,
makers, but also the citizens. The
voy a tratar de
second,
conectarla con la tercera,
I'm going to try to connect to the third
el
question.
tema de residuos
In regard
específicamente
to
de baterías.
the waste or
Es un tema
residues
que
of
la regulación
batteries,
se maneja a
this
nivel
is something
nacional
that
o en
the
algunas
regulation
ocasiones a
should
nivel
be
regional.
handled at national
Entonces, por
level and
ejemplo, la Unión
sometimes at
Europea
regional
ha
level.
avanzado
For
bastante en
instance, the
términos de
European Union
regulación
has
del
made a
uso,
lot of
del
progress in
segundo
terms
uso y
of regulation
disposición de
of the
baterías.
second
Todavía está
use
en
and
proceso,
disposal
incluso
of
compartiendo
batteries.
con
It is under development. You can probably
creo
share
que
content
apenas
part
está en desarrollo.
of
¿Sí?
content of
Y
these
esos
document, but it
avances
is
se están
under
tomando
development.
como
But those
referencia para otros
advances
países
are taken as reference
diferentes
for other
regiones para
countries in
simular
different regions in order to simulate or
duplicar
to
ese proceso.
double
Hay países
that
que están más
or to
adelantados
duplicate that
que
process.
otros.
Some countries
Vale la pena
are
decir
have made more progress than others,
el tema
but
de
I could say that in terms of
es
regulations,
crítico porque
is critical
digamos muchos países
because
incluso antes de la
we
movilidad
have
eléctrica
many
no tenían
countries, even
claro
before
una regulación
e-mobility,
en
they didn't
términos
have a clear about regulation
cómo hacer disposición
in
de
terms on
residuos peligrosos.
how
Entonces tenemos que
to
empezar,
make
digamos, a
the
construir todo un tema de
hazardous
regulaciones
residue
para
disposal.
después agregar el componente de la movilidad
Then
eléctrica.
we added
Entonces,
the
lo que estamos
component
haciendo
of
básicamente
electrical mobility.
nosotros estamos
What we're doing
compartiendo los
basically
casos de
is
estudio
we
en
are
estos temas.
sharing the
Por
case
ejemplo,
studies in
el
these
caso de
matters.
Fortec
For instance,
en
at the
Costa Rica, en donde
Fortec
ya existe
case of Costa Rica, where they
esta
already
fábrica, que
have
queremos
these
tener escenarios de
factory.
intercambio donde podamos mostrar estas experiencias,
We
mostrar
want to
también
have
lo que
these
se viene haciendo
exchanges
desde la Unión Europea.
of
Pero
information
digamos que
as from their
es un
practices.
tema de enfoque
And in
nacional,
terms of European
incluso
Union, for instance, this
regional,
has a national
no
and
existe
some
una
regional
regulación global en
approach.
términos
There is no
mundiales.
global regulation that covers these.
Perfecto. Se entendió perfectamente la respuesta, Luis
Okay, well
Felipe.
understood.
Y
The
pasemos
answer
ahora
very
con
well.
algunas
Now I'm going
preguntas
to
de
move
quienes
on to
tenemos
a few questions of
las
those
manos levantadas
who
en
have their hands raised in the panel. That's okay. We are going to with Gabriela, very concise, mention there just to take advantage of.
Hola, buenos días.
Okay, hi, good morning. Thank you, Luis Felipe. I'm greeting you from Galapagos, Ecuador, and I believe that the question has already been answered with the previous intervention, which is the concern that we have, for instance, in island regions to implement electric mobility programs and the implementation of batteries, environmental management, etc. About 10 years ago, here in Galapagos, Galapagos Island, we started an electromobility program. We had a few initiatives and some vehicles were able to enter, but now we have a very serious problem of cemetery of electric batteries that we don't know how to handle. And in the mainland, there is no regulations that could help us with it. And although it is an alternative for sustainable mobility and transportation, it is becoming a problem, particularly because of the management of the lithium batteries that are disposed of. So we don't know if there is any successful case of lithium batteries management. Well, thank you for the question, Gabriela. Well, we have a project in Ecuador. I don't know if you were able to see on the map that is financed by GF and that has a component of the batteries. Maybe I can put you in touch with people who are leading this project so that you can make your comment in detail about your concern. Okay, thank you very much, Luis Felipe. And now let's move on to the question before the last one.
Hola, buenas.
Felipe. Okay, yes.
Tengo una consulta respecto a la infraestructura.
Siempre cuando se muestran estos modelos de desarrollo, ¿cierto? Sostenible, creo que la palabra sostenible también debería abordar las oportunidades financieras que tienen los mismos países por los gastos que se generan o se desprenden de estos cambios de infraestructura tan relevantes. Por ejemplo, estamos hablando de que van a llegar nuevos coches, estamos hablando de que van a llegar cargadores, van a llegar un montón de otras cosas, ¿cierto? Y esa infraestructura se tiene que pagar, o sea, no es gratuita, y eso o se paga por medio de el pago de impuestos o directamente como el costo al consumidor de ese requerimiento. Y hoy día la infraestructura está, pero la vamos a sustituir por otra. Entonces, se empiezan a generar brechas en términos económicos de las poblaciones más vulnerables que no van a poder acceder a esto o que van a tener problemas para poder adaptarse al cambio.
Creo que la pregunta tal vez es cómo no dejar a nadie atrás, más bien.
How not to leave anyone behind, right? Not to leave anyone behind. Well, I think that the main thing here is to
quién tiene la responsabilidad de hacer qué.
look at who is responsible for what.
Todo lo,
In this
la
case,
electromovilidad primero tiene que entrar por
electromobility
los servicios
must
de transporte público.
start
La forma
through with the
poder
transportation,
llegar,
public
digamos,
transportation services,
de una
a
manera
way
más,
to reach
equitativa a
in a more equitable
ciudadanos y ciudadanas.
way to all citizens.
La electromovilidad en sistemas de transporte privado creo que
The
es una
private
inversión que deben hacer
transportation
los
is an
privados,
investment that must be
de
done by
acuerdo,
the
digamos,
people themselves.
a que
And
sea una tecnología costo eficiente. Entonces,
regardless
toda
of if this is
todo el presupuesto público que se vaya a meter en esto debe
cost
ser
effective
enfocado
issue,
en beneficiar
all these should be
la mayoría de las
focused
personas,
firstly
y en
on
este caso, a través
benefiting
del
most
transporte
people.
público.
And
Y,
this should
por
be done
ejemplo, con
through
una
public
flota
transportation.
de
So
distribución de
when
carga
a fleet of
decide hacer esto,
distribution
es
of
porque se tienen los
load
recursos,
decides to do
pueden
this,
acceder
is
tal
because
vez
they
a
have
préstamos
resources, they can
con
access
diferentes
to
tasas de
loans
financiación
with
por
different
temas de reducción de
financing
emisiones,
rates
pero
because
son
of the
inversiones
reduction of
netamente privadas.
emissions. But those investments
No
are
sé si doy respuesta a
completely
tu pregunta,
private. I don't know if I
creo que
was
es la
able to
forma en la
answer
que
your question, but I think
podemos
that's
tratar
the way
llegar
we
a
could probably reach the
comunidades que puedan existir.
different communities out there.
Super. Muchas gracias, Luis Felipe, por esa
Thank you so much, Luis Felipe, for that question. We're going to the last question to close the session. To those who are still here, we're going to give the floor to Pedro Maldonado to the last question, and then we are going to close. Well, good morning, everyone. We understand that the trend is to move or to switch to electromobility, and not necessarily to the source of the stations of charge that come up with clean energies, not necessarily, at least that's what we can see in our countries in Latin America. This is one consultation. How to encourage these countries under these points of charge can create that and bring about these clean energies. Is there any problem? And my second question is about the disposal of batteries. Let's see how the level of a battery can dispose of them. At what time we say, okay, what point we say, okay, this battery is no longer useful for electromobility. And then I have to dispose of it. Or perhaps I can do some second use. Perhaps there are some photovoltaic uses at home. Or what other usages can we provide to the second-hand batteries? Well, in regard to the first question, what we are doing right now is trying to develop projects that handle the related issues, that is electromobility, but also infrastructure of charging infrastructure with renewable energies. We have to see, or sometimes there are still vehicles that need to use steel fossil fuel, like in the case of the islands. That's why we needed to develop the projects of electromobility with these renewable energy chargers. Also, in terms of investment, it's not only about the electric car investment, but also the chargers. But based on renewable energies, and to develop joint projects. That's the answer that I can provide here. It's not only about seeking and implementing electric car, but to create the resources to validate that all the charging infrastructure is used accurately and correctly for this service by using renewable energies. We want to have also a renewable energy presentation. Perhaps you can then ask what other type of financing is out there. In regard to the batteries, well, there is no specific value that, okay, you can say, okay, I'm no longer going to use the battery. It's like saying that my cell phone is being used or it has only 60% and then I am going to dispose of. This is a subjective matter with a specific standard. However, in many biddings of public transportation, there's going to be 85% depending on the operation. Okay, they can say, okay, I can have a margin of about 85%, and then I can no longer have a lower value. That's the value to take with, but it depends on a lot on the operation. This depends on the one-on-one situation.
Lo que dicen es el estado de la batería.
Entonces, vehicles tells you the status of the state of the battery. It tells you that it's 80% or less than 80% of the use of batteries.
Yo me tengo que ir a otra reunión.
I'm sorry, I have another meeting to attend to, so I don't know if we can probably. I'm going to leave my contact information if you would like to make any other question. Yes, sure, of course.
Ahí sí creo. Ya, oye, estamos cerrando la academia.
So now we are going to close. Thank you, Luis Felipe, for his presentation. We are going to share his presentation as well.
No, ahora sí. Ya, listo. Ahora sí estamos cerrando la sesión. Muchas gracias.
So we are closing the session. Thank you, Luis Felipe, for your presentation. We have your email in the last slide. The presentation we have in the lab, we have Luis on the chat, and thank you so much for answering the questions. And once again, to congratulate you for the presentation was really complete, and we are keen to know more. There are some questions on the chat about critical minerals and economy, subsidies for the energy transition, and to remind you that we are going to see in class 8 and 10 later on in this program. So with no further ado, thank you so much, Luis Felipe, and thanks to everyone who have joined us today. Thank you.